Hi folks, Tom here. Our next pawn shop rescue, this beautiful Dean Edge 09 base. It was a real basket case. Electronics didn't work. Neck had a really heavy duty curve. It was a real risk even buying it because it may not have straightened out, but I had to take a chance. It was obviously somebody's loved instrument and I wanted to bring it back to that state. So here, if you want to follow along while I show you the steps necessary to bring this puppy back to shape. Here we go. First thing when I got home was to see if we could adjust the bow out of the neck. So, went after the truss rod. It turned almost a full turn before it felt like it engaged. And then, doing a quarter turn at a time, or actually 2 1/8 turn adjustments at a time, I would turn it a quarter turn, put the base away for a day, come back, do it again. Did that over 3 or 4 days, so probably a full turn before it was in somewhat adjustment. But got the neck pretty flat, which made me happy because that would have been a real deal breaker. A broken truss rod would have probably much been into the road for this base. So with that hurdle cleared, we can move to disassembling and starting to repair the rest of the base. So we take off the bridge. It's a fairly heavy bridge. In fact, it's made of a thicker piece of steel than the one I took off a Squire Jazz 77 model recently. Got fairly nice heavy saddles, so seems like it would intonate well. We'll see how it all goes back together. We'll soak the screws in some CLP and clean the bridge up a little bit, and it should be quite nice. Okay, let's get a look at those electronics. Take off this nice little cover plate here. The volume pot wasn't even attached, so this should be interesting. Shielded on that side, not actually grounded to the inside, so not sure how effective the shielding is. Okay, one pot sort of connected, twisty with the wires, and the ground's clearly disconnected. Okay, let's get the jack off this thing. Dean guitars got their start in the 70s with Dean Zielinski, who lent his name to him, and became famous for many heavy metal acts later, from Dimebag Darrell to Dave Mustaine having signature models, so very popular with the heavy metal acts. Here we see most of the wiring is simply disconnected. Usually you have a bad jack or potentiometer. This time everything being disconnected is the reason. So let's go ahead and get the other pot off here. Sometimes stuff's finger tight, not this time. All right, found the right size socket, and off she comes. So we'll need to open the holes up for the American pots. So we get our 3/8 inch drill bit, and because the finish on this guitar is fairly hard, I felt okay doing this instead of using a reamer or a unibit. Basically just kind of cut the finish off with the bit by hand, as you see. Then little tape, D-tack of course, and we'll go after it with a drill to make sure they're big enough for the new pots. And again, if this is your very expensive guitar or something that you prize, don't do it this way. Use a unibit, use a reamer, but you know, being an inexpensive guitar, I was willing to take the chance on the finish. And it went fine actually, so it's just a matter of how good the finish is on the guitar, and this guitar has a very thick finish. This bass is 11 years old, and after then finding a knob gone, the shape the potentiometers are in, I figure it's best just to replace them. A nice set of new Bourns American pots will be smooth and feel like glass. Okay, let's get the pickup off here. Get it disconnected. Okay, and then we can polish the guitar. The little Mother's number 1 and a cutting wheel. Again, if you don't have a buffer, you can do this by hand. Use some McGuire's number 9 swirl remover or Mother's number 1 polish, and let it set up for a few minutes and then rub it down. Anywhere that is still scratched, another application's fine. Next we can move on to the tuning pegs. They're a little worn and loose, but they're not worn out, so we're going to save them. So they're all a little loose. And get our ratchet. This is where I should have used a deep well socket and saved myself some trouble. But tighten the nuts and washers on the face. Again, don't crush them. Guitars are made of softer woods and they don't need huge amounts of torque on the nuts. I will say I've been pleasantly surprised by the quality of the hardware on this guitar. Most entry-level guitars have very low quality hardware that needs to be replaced, or in some cases it's just completely not up to the task. So again, the quality of the hardware on this guitar is surprising for the price range. So a new one of these would run you about $300 from Sweetwater, which isn't bad. I'd say it's actually not a bad value at $225 if you can find one on sale. Next, we tighten the screws for the knobs, get the feel to be a little better. Oops, have to actually hold it to tighten it. And there, after the feel is good, there's just a right amount of tension. Check a couple more times to make sure the tension's about where I like it. Feels pretty good. Maybe just a little more. Just a little more. Okay. Flip the guitar over and peel the stickers that have been on the tuning pegs for 11 years off. I can't understand how people cannot remove the stickers from new devices when they get them. It's the most amazing thing. So then tighten the screws, being careful not to strip them. They are small and easily stripped, so be careful. Moving on to the heavily worn frets, start by putting a little marker on top of them to see where you're working. It gives you an idea of what you have and haven't removed as you try to level them. And the amount of wear on this guitar's frets pretty much meant that this was going to have to be done. Leveling frets isn't necessarily hard. It's a little time consuming. Takes patience. You'll need a sanding block with 1500 grit paper, or possibly a prepared sanding block that they sell at some auto parts stores that are 1500 or 2000 grit. You just lightly rub it along the frets, making sure to cover the contour. You're not trying to rub the middle down. Don't push on the sanding block. You let the weight of the block kind of carry it down the frets, and just try to evenly remove the ink until you have kind of a nice shiny consistency that appears to be level. Then, using a fret rocker, go up and down the frets, trying to rock, looking for any high points. After this fretboard was fairly good up until about the 15th, 14th fret, and there was a couple of very high frets. So maybe it was the 16th, I don't remember. But as you can see, the rocker actually rocks. So in this case, you need to level the fret off in the middle. Basically, I use the sanding block by holding it at a slight angle to where it's really only touching the high fret, and just kind of lightly sand down that one fret. You could use a file, but you have to be careful. A file would take off so much material so quickly. The sandpaper is much more forgiving. And check it again, polish a few more times till you get a nice even level consistency. There you go. And looking better. Okay. I hesitated to put this in. The neck had a very high amount of grain raised in this area. I decided to polish it down using 1500 grit sandpaper, being very careful. You start across the grain to level, and then go back with the grain to remove the sanding scratches. Being very gentle. You're not trying to sand the frets, and you're really not trying to sand the nut or anything else. You're just trying to smooth and polish the area between the frets. And then to add the crown shape back, I'm using a fret crowning file. It's a very handy tool when you have a very worn fretboard like this. Saves a lot of time that you would spend in other manners or using other devices that aren't really made for it. This has a special crown made into it, so it just puts the proper crown right on the fret. So after crowning, we will tape the neck off and prepare for fret polishing with the fret erasers, one of my favorite guitar tools. All right, detacking the tape so we don't rip wood out of the fretboard. Remember, masking tape is much stickier than people give it credit for, and guitars with rosewood fretboards have no finish. You can literally remove grain by pulling the tape up. Let me start with our 180 grit fret eraser. Hold it at a 30 to 45 degree angle, removing the corrosion and to finish the crown off that you started with the crowning file. Nice and polished. And a little time spent here is well worth it. After that, clean it up some, go to the 400 and start to polish. Again, holding it at a 30 to 45 degree angle. You remove the rest of the corrosion and try to get a nice sheen to them. Lastly, we come back with 1000 and polish the frets. And okay, let's start putting her back together. I'll fish the wire through here for the pickup. Pickup doesn't have any springs. It has a piece of foam underneath. That's a common technique on less expensive bases, I'm finding. And after you get the wire fished in there, the pickup in, we'll reinstall the screws. The stock pickup is a soap bar, and being a single coil is punchy and dynamic, which is, it's good for the rock and roll kind of music people would want to play with it, maybe even some jazz music. Okay, now we're going to upgrade the electrics. I pre-soldered the potentiometers and capacitor to make it a little easier. Then all you have to do is attach the pickup and the grounds, and you're good to go. I didn't have a new orange drop capacitor in the 0.01 or 0.1 microfarad range, so I desoldered the original and installed it on the pot before we went to install all this. Here I'm feeding the ground wire in for the bridge, and we'll get the pots in there. Oops, got to set them to the right height. When you have the long front threads, they typically have to be back set slightly so the knobs don't stick out really far. Okay, get those in there and then kind of try to tuck and hide the wires the best you can, and get our jack in. Okay, deal with the potentiometers. How's the height? They stick out a little too far. We probably should adjust them some. Okay, we'll raise them up about that much. Duplicate it with the other one, then reinstall them. We'll check the height again before we go to install the nuts. Looks good, so here we go with the washers and nuts. You do want to support the potentiometers from behind when you go to tighten these. It's very easy to twist the wires off that you just soldered, or jam it up against the side of the compartment to where the knob actually won't turn. Or you can tighten it to where the pinch is so tight that it puts it in a bind and it won't turn. So it's always good to check. They seem to turn, they're Bourns knobs, so they're very free turning. You want to get these tight, but don't crush the face of the guitar. If they come loose, you end up with the problems this guitar had initially, and someone will twist the wire until it twists the pot until one of the wires twists loose, and then your guitar doesn't work. And that's another nightmare of itself. So, okay, reinstall the jack. And again, here you want to make sure to get this very tight. One of the biggest problems I run into with guitars is the jack has come loose. Someone's twisted enough to actually pull the ground wire or the positive wire off. They go to reinstall it. They jimmy the screws. They mess up the holes. If you do it right the first time, there won't be someone back in there again fixing it later. So just a good thing to keep in mind. And reinstall the rest of the hardware, our strap buttons. And then there's our ground wire that will need to be tucked under the bridge when it's replaced. Here's the cleaned and polished bridge with the intonation set similar to where it was found. I'm not sure if it was correct, but it's a starting point. So reinstall the screws, being careful not to strip anything. Take your time. Don't really muscle them down. There's no reason to apply monkey force to a guitar. They just don't need it. Okay, here we go. Install the screws for the jack plate. Again, don't over torque. Strip the heads off or the holes out. If these holes are already stripped, they can be fixed with a toothpick and wood glue. A little wood glue in the hole, shove a toothpick in, let it dry for a little while, break the head off, and then install your screw. Here we go, reinstalling the electronic cover plate. All right. And the other strap button. Make sure the strap button screws are secure. Add a toothpick and glue to those if you must, but don't ever let a guitar strap rip out at a guitar fall. That is the worst feeling in the world. Here we have a new set of all parts knobs to go on the new Bourns potentiometers. I've never found any of the machine style knobs yet that push on in 1/4 inch, so you will have to have some type of change if you had those on your guitar originally and upgrade to the American potentiometers. But these look really good, and they were pretty inexpensive, around $5, so not a bad investment if you ask me. Just push on and make sure they turn okay. Okay, after getting some strings on, let's get a basic setup performed here. All right. We'll start with checking our neck relief. And first you have to, okay, place a finger on the fret where the neck meets the body. And then it's much easier to use a capo, but mine was in a case that I loaned to someone this day, so I couldn't use it to show you. But then you fret the first fret as well. Then use a feeler gauge to measure the height of the string at the 7th fret. You're looking at 0.3 to 0.5 millimeter. You want the feeler gauge to not cause the string to move, but not to be any gap either. Okay, this guitar needed an adjustment. Get measured out at 0.025 of an inch. So we needed to make a slight adjustment. Remember, never turn the rod too far. You want to turn it about a 1/4 turn at a time and let the guitar rest for quite a while in between before you go and check your relief again. Okay. Measure it again. Measures out at a 0.015, which is good enough. We'll live with it on this. Okay, keep moving forward. Now we need to adjust your string height. Using the string height gauge, you measure the string height at the 12th fret. Very important when doing these kind of activities to hold the guitar upright or in a playing position so that you get accurate measurements. A guitar laid on its back, the weight of the neck will actually cause the strings to be lower. Okay, loosen the height screws here. Make sure they're kept even. You want your saddles flat. I see guitars with the saddles at an angle, and this is a bad idea. It allows the string to move up or down on the saddle, changing your intonation and your tuning. Okay, then we use a saddle height gauge after adjusting the strings to the correct height, and make sure that all the strings are in the correct radius for a 12-inch radius guitar. They shouldn't ring out when strummed, so they all are muted, which shows they're pretty much on a 12-inch radius. So this setup's pretty good. We move to setting the intonation. You want to use a tuner, play the open string, fret it at the 12th fret. If there's a big difference in tuning between the two notes, you must use a screwdriver to either shorten or lengthen the string by adjusting the saddle. Be sure to fret all the notes on the neck to make sure you don't have any buzzes. If any do buzz, you may have to raise the string slightly to help eliminate the buzz. Okay, the finished product is quite nice. Really very happy with it. I got a little bit of flack for not letting anyone hear how the last project sounded, so after a long learning curve, I've learned how to record audio off of an instrument, and here's a short clip of the way the bass sounds. So as you can hear, it's punchy and dynamic. I really kind of like it. Not much of a bass player, but there's always time to learn more. So if you like this project and want to see more of this kind of stuff, be sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you again next time, folks.